The white lace of her wedding dress caught the wind like a ghost dancing through the tombstones, and Eliza Lawson stood perfectly still among the dead, one hand pressed against the fresh grave marker that read, Thomas Brennan, beloved son, 1848–1873. Marcus Webb had been leaning against the iron cemetery gate for nearly an hour, his weathered hat pulled low against the October sun of 1873, watching the woman who should have been celebrating her wedding day instead mourning at a grave in Palisade, Colorado. He had ridden into town that morning to deliver horses to the livery stable, expecting nothing more than a hot meal and a soft bed at the boarding house, before heading back to his ranch outside of Grand Junction. Instead, he had stumbled upon a scene that made his chest tighten with a sadness he could not quite name. The whole town had been whispering about it when he arrived. The bride left at the altar, they said. The groom shot dead in a saloon fight the night before the wedding, they said. A senseless death over a card game gone wrong, they said. Marcus shifted his weight, his spurs jingling softly. He did not know why he stayed. Perhaps it was the way she stood so straight despite the obvious weight of her grief. Or perhaps it was simply that no one should be alone in their darkest moment. The October wind was getting colder as afternoon stretched toward evening, and he worried about her standing out there without even a shawl. The wedding dress was beautiful. He could see that even from a distance, all ivory, silk, and delicate embroidery, but it was not made for warmth. Eliza felt the presence of the stranger at the gate, had felt it for some time now, but she could not bring herself to care. Thomas was dead. The man she had loved since she was 16 years old. The man she had waited for while he worked to save enough money to buy them a small house on the edge of town. The man who had finally asked her father for her hand just 3 months ago was lying 6 feet beneath the Colorado soil. They were supposed to be married yesterday. She was supposed to be Mrs. Thomas Brennan by now, waking up in the small house he had prepared for them, planning their future, talking about children and dreams and all the beautiful ordinary things that made up a life. Instead, she had watched them lower his coffin into the ground while wearing the dress she had sewn with her own hands, every stitch a prayer for happiness that would never be answered. Her mother had begged her not to come to the funeral in her wedding dress, had called it unseemly and strange, but Eliza did not care what anyone thought. Thomas had never seen her in this dress. He had died the night before their wedding, shot by a drifter named Jack Carlisle over a disputed poker hand. Thomas had not even been a gambling man. He had only been in the saloon because his friends insisted on buying him drinks to celebrate his last night as a bachelor. The unfairness of it all made her want to scream, but she had no screams left. She had cried herself hollow over the past 2 days. Now she just stood here, one hand on the wooden marker that would eventually be replaced with a proper headstone, once her father could afford to have one carved. She stood here because leaving felt like abandoning Thomas, like accepting that he was truly gone, and she was not ready for that. She might never be ready for that. Marcus finally pushed himself away from the gate and walked slowly through the cemetery, his boots crunching on the dry autumn grass. He stopped a respectful distance away, close enough that she would hear him if he spoke, but far enough that he was not intruding on her private grief. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice rough from years of calling to cattle across open ranges. "I do not mean to disturb you, but the sun is getting low. It will be cold soon." Eliza did not turn to look at him. "I am aware. I just thought you might want someone to walk you back to town. These roads are not always safe after dark." "I am not afraid of the dark," Eliza said, her voice flat and distant. "There is nothing in the darkness that could hurt me more than what has already happened." Marcus was quiet for a moment, understanding the truth in her words. He had known loss himself. His wife Sarah had died giving birth to their stillborn daughter 5 years ago, and for months afterward he had felt the same way this woman sounded. Like nothing in the world could touch him anymore because the worst had already come to pass. "No," he agreed softly. "I suppose there is not. But still, when you are ready, I will walk with you." Eliza finally turned to look at him, really look at him. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that held a genuine kindness despite their obvious weariness. His clothes were clean but worn, the clothes of a working man who took care of what he had but could not afford luxuries. There was something solid about him, something steady that made her feel just slightly less like she was falling through space with nothing to catch her. "Why?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No, madam, I do not. But I know what it is like to lose everything you thought your life would be. And I know that sometimes the kindness of a stranger is easier to accept than the pity of people who knew you before." Eliza felt something crack in her chest at his words, some small piece of the wall she had built around herself to keep from shattering completely. She looked back at Thomas's grave, at the mound of fresh earth, and the simple wooden cross, and felt the weight of reality settling on her shoulders. He was gone. Standing here would not bring him back. Staying until she froze to death would not change anything except to add one more tragedy to a situation that was already unbearable. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am ready." Marcus stepped closer and offered his arm, which she took with trembling fingers. Her hand was ice cold even through his shirt sleeve. As they walked slowly through the cemetery toward the gate, he could feel her shaking, whether from cold or grief, or both he could not tell. At the gate, he paused and shrugged out of his worn leather jacket, draping it over her shoulders despite her weak protest. "I have been working in the sun all day," he said. "I am plenty warm." The jacket smelled like leather and horse and something else, something clean and masculine that was not unpleasant. Eliza pulled it closer around herself, grateful for the warmth even as she felt guilty for feeling anything resembling comfort on the day she had buried the man she loved. They walked in silence down the dirt road that led from the cemetery back into the main part of Palisade. It was a small town, just a few streets of businesses and houses clustered along the railroad line that had brought prosperity to this part of Colorado. Eliza had lived here her whole life, had never been further than Grand Junction, 20 miles to the west. Thomas had promised to take her to Denver someday to show her the big city and all its wonders. Another promise that would never be kept. "Where are you staying?" Marcus asked as they reached the edge of town. "My father's house," Eliza said, "on Peach Street." "I know it," Marcus said, though he did not. He would find it. Palisade was not big enough to get lost in. They found the house easily enough. A modest white structure with a small porch and a vegetable garden in front that was brown and dying with the changing season. Before they reached the door, it flew open, and a woman who could only be Eliza's mother rushed out, her face a mixture of relief and anger. "Eliza Lawson, where have you been? I have been worried sick. It is nearly dark." "I was at the cemetery, Mama," Eliza said tiredly. "You knew where I was." "For hours, standing out there for hours in the cold." Her mother's eyes landed on Marcus, taking in the stranger with her daughter, the jacket around Eliza's shoulders. "Who is this?" "Marcus Webb, madam," Marcus said, removing his hat respectfully. "I was just making sure your daughter got home safely. I will be on my way now." He gently extracted his jacket from Eliza's shoulders, their fingers brushing briefly. For just a moment, their eyes met and something passed between them, some wordless acknowledgement of shared pain and understanding. Then Marcus settled his hat back on his head. nodded to both women, and turned to walk away into the gathering dusk. Eliza watched him go, feeling oddly bereft, as though something she had not known she needed had just been taken away. Her mother ushered her inside, clucking and fussing, helping her out of the wedding dress that would now be nothing more than a reminder of the worst day of her life. Eliza let herself be managed, too exhausted to resist. She ate the soup her mother insisted on, though it tasted like ashes in her mouth. She let her father kiss her forehead and tell her that time would heal this wound, even though she did not believe him. She went to her small bedroom, the room she had expected to leave as a bride and return to only for visits, and lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She just lay there thinking about Thomas, about the future they would never have, and strangely, about the cowboy with the kind eyes who had waited patiently at the cemetery gate until she was ready to leave. Marcus returned to the boarding house where he had taken a room and lay in his own bed, unable to sleep. The image of the woman in the wedding dress, standing so alone among the graves, haunted him. He had not expected to feel anything when he rode into Palisade that morning. He had not felt much of anything for 5 years, not since Sarah died. He had thrown himself into his work, building his small ranch into something successful, raising cattle and horses, keeping himself too busy to think about what he had lost. But something about Eliza Lawson had reached through the numbness that had become his constant companion. Maybe it was seeing his own grief reflected in another person. Maybe it was the stubborn strength she showed even in her darkest moment. Or maybe it was simply that 5 years was long enough to be alone, and his heart was finally ready to feel something again, even if that something was just compassion for a stranger's pain. He had planned to leave Palisade in the morning, to return to his ranch, and his work and his solitary life. But as he lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, he found himself thinking that maybe he would stay another day, just to make sure she was all right, just to see if there was anything he could do to help. It was a decision that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made everything seem sharper and more real. Eliza woke feeling hollowed out but also restless, unable to bear the thought of staying in bed while her mother tiptoed around downstairs, treating her like she was made of glass that might shatter at any moment. She dressed in a simple brown dress, pinned her dark hair up in a no-nonsense bun, and went downstairs to find her mother making breakfast. "Eliza, sweetheart, you should rest," her mother said immediately. "I have rested enough," Eliza said firmly. "I need to do something. I need to keep moving or I think I will go mad." Her mother looked at her with worried eyes but did not argue. She knew her daughter well enough to recognize when pushing would only make things worse. Instead, she suggested that Eliza might walk to the general store for some supplies they needed, thinking that a simple errand might be good for her, might help her face the town and all the pitying looks that would surely come. Eliza agreed, grateful for a purpose, any purpose. She took a basket and a list and set out into the cool morning air. Palisade was already awake and bustling, people going about their ordinary lives as though the world had not ended 2 days ago. It felt surreal to Eliza, this normalcy, but she forced herself to walk with her head high, to nod politely to the people who greeted her, even as she saw the pity and curiosity in their eyes. She was leaving the general store, her basket full of flour and sugar and coffee, when she saw Marcus Webb leading a string of horses down the main street toward the livery stable. He had not left town after all. Something in her chest loosened slightly at the sight of him, though she could not have said why. He spotted her at the same moment and changed direction, guiding the horses toward where she stood on the wooden sidewalk. "Miss Lawson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good morning." "Mr. Webb," she replied. "I thought you would be gone by now." "I had some more business to attend to," he said, which was not entirely true but not entirely false either. He had found business to attend to, arranging to sell a few horses to a rancher who lived south of town, specifically so he would have a reason to stay. "How are you this morning?" It was a stupid question, he realized as soon as he said it. How could she possibly be after burying her fiancé in her wedding dress? But Eliza did not seem offended. Instead, she considered the question seriously. "I am breathing," she said finally. "That is about all I can say for certain." "That is a start," Marcus said gently. "Some days, breathing is enough." They stood there for a moment, an island of stillness in the busy morning street, and Eliza felt that same sense of connection she had felt the night before. This stranger understood something about her grief that even her own family did not quite grasp. Her parents wanted her to heal, to move on, to return to being the daughter they knew. But Marcus Webb simply accepted her where she was, broken and lost and barely holding on, and that acceptance was more comforting than all her mother's hovering could ever be. "Would you walk with me?" The words came out before Eliza quite realized she was going to say them. "Just for a little while. I find that I do not want to go home just yet, but I also do not want to be alone." Marcus nodded immediately. "I would be honored, madam." He secured the horses to a hitching post outside the livery with a promise to the stable boy to watch them, then offered Eliza his arm. She took it, and they began to walk, with no particular destination in mind, just moving through the town, and then out past its edges into the open land beyond. They talked as they walked, carefully at first, about inconsequential things. The weather, the town, the horses Marcus raised. But gradually, as the morning wore on and they found themselves following a path along the Colorado River that ran near Palisade, their conversation deepened. Marcus told her about his ranch, about the satisfaction he found in working with horses, in seeing something grow from his own efforts. Eliza told him about her life in Palisade, about her work as a seamstress, about her dreams of someday seeing more of the world. And eventually, inevitably, they talked about loss. Marcus told her about Sarah, about the daughter who had never drawn breath, about the years of numbness that had followed. Eliza told him about Thomas, about their long courtship, about the stupid, senseless accident that had stolen him away the night before they were supposed to begin their life together. They talked about grief and anger and the unfairness of a world that could take away the people you loved most without warning or reason. "You still love her?" Eliza asked at one point. "Your wife?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow past. "I will always love her," he said finally. "She was my first love, and she gave me some of the happiest years of my life. But I have also learned that the heart is bigger than we think it is. Loving someone you lost does not mean you cannot love someone else. It just means you carry that first love with you while you move forward." Eliza absorbed his words, turning them over in her mind. "I cannot imagine loving anyone else right now. I cannot imagine ever feeling anything but this terrible emptiness." "I know," Marcus said. "I felt that way too. For a long time, but I was wrong. The emptiness does not last forever, even though it feels like it will. Eventually, if you let it, life finds a way back in." They walked for hours, and by the time they returned to town, the sun was high overhead. Eliza felt exhausted but also somehow lighter, as though sharing her grief with someone who truly understood had eased some of the crushing weight of it. At her father's door, she turned to Marcus. "Thank you," she said simply. "For today, for yesterday, for understanding." "You do not need to thank me," Marcus said. "I am glad I could help, even if only a little. Will you stay in town?" The question came out more hopeful than Eliza had intended, revealing more than she meant to reveal. Marcus hesitated, knowing he should probably say no, should probably return to his ranch and his work, and let this woman grieve in her own time without the complication of a stranger inserting himself into her life. But he found that he did not want to leave. Not yet. "For a few more days," he said. "I have some business that will keep me here." Eliza smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but it was the first real smile Marcus had seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I am glad," she said softly, then turned and went inside before he could respond. Over the next week, they fell into a pattern. Marcus would find reasons to be in town, and Eliza would find reasons to need to leave her house, and somehow they would always end up together, walking and talking for hours. They explored the countryside around Palisade, following the river, climbing up into the red rock hills that surrounded the valley, sitting in the shade of cottonwood trees, and sharing the simple lunches that Eliza would pack. The town began to notice, of course. People talked, as people in small towns always did. Some thought it was too soon, that Eliza should be properly mourning Thomas, not gallivanting around with a strange cowboy. Others thought it was just what she needed, a distraction from her grief. Eliza's mother worried, unsure what to make of this developing friendship, but her father was more philosophical. "Let her be," he told his wife. "That girl has had her heart broken. If this fellow can help her heal, then I am not going to stand in the way." For her part, Eliza was not entirely sure what was happening between her and Marcus. She knew that she looked forward to seeing him with an eagerness that felt almost like guilt, as though by enjoying his company, she was somehow betraying Thomas's memory. But she also knew that being with Marcus made her feel alive again, made her feel like maybe someday she might actually want to keep living instead of just going through the motions of existence. Marcus was fighting his own internal battle. He had not expected to feel this way again, had not expected to meet someone who would make his heart beat faster, who would make him think about the future instead of just surviving the present. He was falling in love with Eliza Lawson. He realized one afternoon as they sat by the river, and she laughed at something he said, really laughed, throwing her head back with pure joy. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it filled him with a hope he had not felt in years. But he also knew it was too soon for her. She was still grieving, still processing her loss. He could not, would not, pressure her or push her toward feelings she might not be ready for. So he kept his growing love to himself, and simply tried to be what she needed, which was a friend and a companion and someone who understood. 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral, Eliza and Marcus were sitting under their favorite cottonwood tree, watching the late afternoon sun turn the red rocks golden, when Eliza spoke the thought that had been growing in her mind. "I think Thomas would have liked you," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her surprised. "You do?" "Yes. He was a good man, a kind man. He would have appreciated you being here for me. He would not have wanted me to be alone in my grief." She paused, picking at the grass beside her. "I think he would have wanted me to be happy again eventually." "Eventually," Marcus agreed carefully. "When you are ready." Eliza turned to look at him fully, her hazel eyes searching his face. "What if I think I might be ready, not for everything, not all at once, but for something?" Marcus's heart stuttered in his chest. "Eliza, I do not want you to feel like you have to rush anything for my sake. I am not going anywhere." "I know you are not. That is part of what makes this feel right instead of wrong." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Marcus, I am not going to lie and say I do not still love Thomas." Part of me will always love him, will always mourn the life we could have had. But I am also starting to realize that I have a choice. I can let that grief define the rest of my life, or I can honor his memory by choosing to live, really live, and maybe even love again. And is that what you want? Marcus asked softly. To love again. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the river, at the endless flow of water that kept moving no matter what happened on its banks. I think I am already starting to, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I think I am starting to fall in love with you, Marcus Webb, and it terrifies me. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were warm and small, and they curled around his like they belonged there. It terrifies me too, he confessed. I never thought I would feel this way again. I never thought I would want to risk my heart after losing Sarah. But you make me want to try. You make me want to believe in second chances. They sat there, hands clasped, as the sun sank lower and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was not a declaration of forever. It was not a promise that everything would be easy or that grief would simply disappear. But it was a beginning, fragile and tentative and precious. When Marcus walked Eliza home that evening, he kissed her forehead gently at her door, a chaste touch that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through them both. We will go slow, he promised, as slow as you need. Thank you, Eliza whispered, and she went inside feeling lighter than she had since the day Thomas died. The weeks turned into months, and autumn gave way to the harsh cold of a Colorado winter. Marcus moved his base of operations temporarily to Palisade, taking a room at the boarding house long-term and managing his ranch through a trusted foreman. He knew he could not stay forever, that eventually he would need to return to his property and his work full-time, but he also knew that what was growing between him and Eliza was worth the inconvenience and expense. They continued to spend their days together, though the cold weather drove them indoors more often. They would sit in the parlor of her father's house, properly chaperoned by her mother, and talk for hours. Marcus taught her to play chess. Eliza showed him some of her sewing work, the intricate embroidery she created that was the pride of her business. They read to each other from books borrowed from the town's small lending library. They went to church together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the pew while the whole town watched and whispered. On Christmas Day, Marcus gave Eliza a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. Inside, he had placed a tiny photograph of himself that he had taken at the photographer's shop in Grand Junction. "So you can carry me with you," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "even when we are apart." Eliza touched the locket with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. She had not expected to exchange presents with Marcus, had not even thought about Christmas this year beyond the bare minimum her family required. But she had made him something anyway, working on it secretly in her room at night. She gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, made of soft blue fabric that matched his eyes, with careful stitching and pearl buttons that must have cost a significant portion of her savings. "It is beautiful," Marcus said, genuinely touched. "I will treasure it." "I made it to last," Eliza said, "so you can wear it for years." The implication hung in the air between them, years together, a future shared. Marcus pulled her close, mindful of her parents watching from across the room, and held her for a long moment, his face buried in her hair. "I love you, Eliza Lawson," he whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. "I am completely and utterly in love with you." Eliza pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes shining with tears that were not entirely sad. "I love you too," she whispered back. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Marcus." Their first real kiss happened on New Year's Eve. 1873 turning into 1874, with fireworks that some enterprising townspeople had brought in from Denver exploding over the town. They had stepped out onto the porch of her father's house to watch the display, and in the flashing light and noise, Marcus had cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious and breakable. Eliza had kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and loss and fear melting away in the warmth of connection and new love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out without planning. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. I want you to be my wife, Eliza. I want to build a life with you. Marry me." Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. Part of her, the part that still grieved for Thomas, wanted to say it was too soon, that she needed more time. But the larger part, the part that had come back to life over these past months, knew exactly what she wanted. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, I will marry you, Marcus Webb." They told her parents that night, and while her mother fretted about propriety and what people would say, her father shook Marcus's hand warmly and welcomed him to the family. They set the wedding date for March, giving themselves a few months to prepare and also to let the scandal die down a bit. People would talk no matter what they did, but a few months of proper engagement would help smooth some of the wagging tongues. Marcus returned to his ranch in January to set his affairs in order and prepare for bringing a wife home. The house needed work, he realized with fresh eyes. It was a bachelor's dwelling, functional but sparse, with none of the comforts a woman would want. He threw himself into improvements, adding curtains and cushions, painting walls, fixing up the spare bedroom that might someday be a nursery. His foreman ribbed him mercilessly about being domesticated, but Marcus did not care. He was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in 5 years. He returned to Palisade in February with a ring he had bought in Grand Junction, a simple gold band with a small ruby, Eliza's birthstone. She cried when he slipped it on her finger, and he kissed away her tears, marveling at how lucky he was to have found her, to have been given this second chance at love and family. The wedding took place on a bright March morning in 1874, in the same church where Thomas Brennan's funeral had been held just 5 months before. Some people in town thought it was in poor taste, getting married so soon, but most understood that life went on, that happiness could follow tragedy, that second chances were precious and should not be wasted. Eliza wore a new dress, simpler than the elaborate wedding gown she had made for Thomas, but lovely in its own way, a soft cream color with green trim that brought out her eyes. She carried wildflowers that Marcus had picked himself that morning, and her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, sad for what she had lost, but happy for what she had found. Marcus stood at the altar in his new blue shirt, the one Eliza had made him, and when she reached him and placed her hand in his, he felt complete in a way he had never expected to feel again. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promises to love and honor and cherish, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed his bride with all the joy and hope and love that filled his heart to bursting. The reception was a modest affair at the town hall, with food brought by neighbors and dancing to music provided by a local fiddle player. Marcus and Eliza moved through it all in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and well wishes, cutting cake and sharing their first dance as husband and wife. As the afternoon wore on and the party began to wind down, they slipped away, climbing into the wagon Marcus had loaded with Eliza's belongings, and began the journey to their new home. The ranch was 20 miles from Palisade, far enough to be isolated but close enough that Eliza could visit her family when she wanted. As they approached in the fading evening light, Marcus watched his new wife's face anxiously, hoping she would like what she saw. The house was not grand, just a solid wooden structure with a porch and a stone chimney, but it was sturdy and well built, and he had poured his heart into making it welcoming for her. "It is perfect," Eliza said softly as he helped her down from the wagon. "It is absolutely perfect." Marcus carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently in the main room. The fire he had arranged to have lit was burning cheerfully in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Eliza walked through the house slowly, taking in all the small details, the curtains that matched the blue of Marcus's eyes, the cushions on the chairs, the quilt on their bed that he had commissioned from a neighbor. "You did all this for me?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted you to feel at home here," Marcus said, suddenly shy. "I wanted you to be happy." Eliza turned to him, and the look in her eyes made his breath catch. It was love, pure and simple and without reservation. She crossed the room and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a passion that left them both dizzy. "I am happy," she said when they broke apart. "I am so incredibly happy, Marcus. Thank you for waiting for me at that cemetery. Thank you for being patient with my grief. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me a reason to love again," Marcus replied, and he swept her into his arms and carried her to their bedroom, closing the door on the world and beginning their marriage in the sweetest possible way. Their first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Learning to live together, to accommodate another person's habits and preferences, took patience and compromise. The ranch was a lot of work, and Eliza had to learn quickly how to manage a household in relative isolation, how to cook for a working ranch hand, how to keep chickens and tend a garden and do all the hundreds of small tasks that made up frontier life. But they were happy. Marcus would come in from a long day of work to find Eliza sewing by the fire, and his heart would swell with love and gratitude. Eliza would wake in the morning to find Marcus watching her with such tenderness that she could hardly believe this was her life now. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams and fears. They laughed together, worked together, made love with increasing confidence and joy. In the fall of 1874, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening over dinner, simply and directly, and watched his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure elation. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and when he released her, she saw tears streaming down his face. "I never thought I would get to be a father," he said, his voice breaking. "After Sarah and the baby, I thought that chance was gone forever." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Eliza assured him, wiping his tears away with her thumbs. "This baby is so lucky to have you." The pregnancy was not easy. Eliza struggled with sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. Marcus hovered anxiously, remembering all too well what had happened to Sarah, terrified of losing Eliza the same way. But Eliza was strong and determined, and when their son was born on a warm May morning in 1875, both mother and baby were healthy and well. They named him Thomas Marcus Webb, honoring both the man Eliza had lost and the man she had found. Marcus held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the tiny perfect miracle in his arms, and Eliza watched them with a heart so full she thought it might burst. This was her family now, this cowboy and this baby, and the life they would build together. Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a lively toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. In 1877, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, honoring Marcus's first wife and Eliza herself. And in 1879, another son arrived, Michael, completing their family. The years passed in a blur of work and love and the beautiful ordinary chaos of raising children. The ranch prospered under Marcus's careful management, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the region. Eliza's sewing business continued as well, working from home and creating beautiful pieces that were in high demand throughout the county. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and a proper dining room. They visited Palisade often, maintaining close ties with Eliza's parents and the community that had been her home. Sometimes, when she was in town, Eliza would visit the cemetery where Thomas was buried. She would stand by his grave and tell him about her life, about her children, about the happiness she had found with Marcus. She never forgot him, never stopped loving the boy he had been and the man he might have become. But she also never regretted choosing to live and love again. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1884, Marcus took Eliza back to Palisade for a special celebration. Her parents hosted a party, inviting friends and family. And as the evening wound down and they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Marcus took his wife's hand. "Do you remember the day I first saw you?" he asked. "Standing in that cemetery in your wedding dress, looking like a ghost among the tombstones." "I remember," Eliza said softly. "I remember thinking I would never feel anything again, never want anything again." "I almost rode away that day," Marcus confessed. "I almost decided it was not my place to intrude on your grief, but something made me stay. Something told me that you needed help and that maybe I needed to help you." "I am so glad you stayed," Eliza said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I am so glad you waited until I was ready to leave. You saved my life, Marcus, not just that day, but every day since." "We saved each other," Marcus corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to live again too, Eliza. You and our children, you are everything I never thought I would have." They sat in comfortable silence, 10 years of marriage having taught them that sometimes words were not necessary, that simply being together was enough. The life they had built was not the life Eliza had planned when she was sewing her wedding dress for Thomas, and it was not the life Marcus had imagined when he married Sarah all those years ago. But it was a good life, full of love and laughter and the 1,000 small joys that made up a family. As they grew older, their love only deepened. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Thomas the younger took over the ranch operations, proving to have his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. Sarah married a teacher from Grand Junction and moved to Denver, living the city life her mother had once dreamed of. Michael became a lawyer, settling in Palisade and serving the community with distinction. Marcus and Eliza became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the house they had built filling with multiple generations during holidays and celebrations. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining constant and true. On a warm spring evening in 1903, nearly 30 years after their wedding, they sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the Colorado landscape they had called home for so long. Marcus took Eliza's hand, the same way he had 1,000 times before, and she smiled at him with eyes that still sparkled with love and mischief. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had left town that day?" Marcus asked. "If I had not waited at the cemetery?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "I think I would have survived," she said finally. "I am stronger than I thought I was back then, but I would not have thrived. I would not have had this beautiful life, these amazing children and grandchildren. I would not have known what it was like to be loved by you, Marcus Webb, and that would have been the greatest tragedy of all. Marcus brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the gesture as romantic at 70 as it had been at 30. "I love you, Eliza Webb. I have loved you from the moment I saw you in that cemetery, though it took me a while to realize it, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Eliza replied, her voice strong and sure. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for giving me time to heal. Thank you for showing me that hearts can break and break and mend again, and that each time they mend, they grow bigger and stronger and capable of even more love." They sat together as the stars came out. Two people who had found each other in the darkest moments of their lives and had built something beautiful and lasting from their shared pain and hope. The cowboy who had waited patiently at the cemetery gate, and the woman in the wedding dress who had been brave enough to leave her grief behind and choose life and love again. Their story was not one of forgetting the past, but of honoring it while embracing the future. It was a story of second chances and the redemptive power of love, and it was theirs, every beautiful, heartbreaking, joyful moment of it. Years later, when they were both gone and their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, they would tell the story of how Marcus and Eliza met. They would talk about the tragedy that brought them together, the patience and kindness that allowed their love to grow, and the beautiful life they had created from the ashes of loss. And they would remember that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely places, that healing takes time, and that second chances, when they come, should be grabbed with both hands and held onto tightly, because they are precious and rare and worth everything. The cemetery where Thomas Brennan was buried still stood on the edge of Palisade, and sometimes Eliza's grandchildren would visit it, laying flowers on the grave of the man they had never known but whose death had, in a strange way, given their family life. And they would remember that love comes in many forms, that grief and joy can coexist, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is simply wait patiently until they are ready to move forward, offering your hand but never forcing them to take it until they choose to reach back. Marcus Webb died peacefully in his sleep in 1905, at the age of 73, with Eliza holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but without the shattering devastation she had felt when Thomas died, because this grief came after a lifetime of love and happiness, after years of waking up next to him and falling asleep in his arms, after raising children and building a life that was rich and full and meaningful. She had known, every single day of their 31-year marriage, how lucky she was to have him, and there was comfort in that knowledge even through her sorrow. Eliza lived for 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the grandfather they had all adored and the life they had built together. She passed away quietly in the spring of 1908, at the age of 77, and was buried next to Marcus in the cemetery in Grand Junction, near his ranch. At her request, a small stone was also placed in the Palisade Cemetery near Thomas's grave, a simple marker that read Eliza Lawson Webb, 1831–1908. She lived, she loved, she chose joy, and that in the end was the truest testament to her life. She had faced unimaginable loss and had chosen, with the help of a patient cowboy who waited at a cemetery gate, to live and love and find joy again. It was a legacy worth celebrating, a story worth remembering, a life worth honoring. From tragedy to triumph, from grief to grace, from a woman standing alone in a graveyard in her wedding dress to a woman surrounded by love and family at the end of her days, Eliza's journey was one of courage and hope, and the enduring power of the human heart to heal and grow and love again, no matter how badly it has been broken.